Hey guys, Vlad here with AVT-Astro. So today I want to cover an interesting topic, and that is light pollution filters for visual use. So where did I come up with this idea? Well, I actually had a little bit of a request from Ashley Art to do thing on light pollution filters. This is actually a subject that I was kind of thinking about doing a video on eventually anyhow. Kind of been avoiding it honestly, just because it's a pretty deep topic. There's a gazillion different filters, and yeah, I mean, it's kind of depending on what kind of scope you have and that type of deal. Opinions can vary on that. But anyhow, let's check it out. Alright, so here they are. These are the contenders. These are my personal filters that most of these I've had for years. I've used them a bunch for, different types of scopes, different scenarios. By the way, before I guess we kind of get to the filters, for those of you that are not familiar, I run a little astro blog called AVT-Astro.com where I do all kinds of, fun astronomy reviews. Overall, I've had the privilege of owning over 100 scopes, more accessories than you could count. So, I've got a pretty decent experience with, with filters in general. So yeah, let's kind of check out the contenders that we've got going on. So the first filter there is the battery UHC-S filter. The second filter is the Battery Moon and Sky Glow filter. That's an awesome one. Next up we have the DGM Omega NPB filter. I'm not really sure what the heck the actual name of this is. I always kind of refer to this as the NPB filter. But yeah, it kind of has, a few abbreviations, I guess. And right now the lighting is actually kind of good, so you kind of see the difference in the colors of the actual filters. So this is actually, it's not really marked with the brand, but this is a Dankemeyer O3 filter. I don't believe that Russ makes these anymore. But that's a good filter. I actually also have a Battery O3 filter. Honestly, I couldn't find it for this video. It's somewhere with my Astro gear. And this is the one that I've had the longest. This is the Orion H Beta filter. Alright, so I guess let's kind of get into it. We'll cover these, more or less kind of one by one, and I'll kind of discuss what kind of objects these are good for, and at the end we'll kind of cover what filters you should consider for your first, second filter, depending on the type of scope you have. So yeah, let's get into it. Alright, so before we kind of get into what these individual filters work well for, and what kind of scopes they work with well, just in general, I want to cover just very briefly how light pollution filters work. So essentially what these guys will do is they actually block some of the light that comes through the telescope. So none of these actually make the object that you're trying to enhance the view of brighter. No matter the filter, they'll actually block the light and dim down the entire view that you see through your telescope. So, well, you might ask yourself, well, what's the point, right? Like, if they dim the whole view, like, how are these beneficial? Well, as I said, there's narrow band and wide band filters, and essentially some objects actually emit their light. In particular, it's usually nebulas in a range of the visible spectrum, to where essentially what the filter will do is it dims down the view of everything through your eyepiece, right? But it dims the background light, so like from light pollution or even from starlight, more than it dims the view of the object that you're trying to enhance. Again, that's usually nebulas that these will work with. So essentially, while the entire view is dimmer, the background, essentially kind of like light pollution and everything, gets dimmed more in comparison to the object that you're trying to observe. So that's the general principle of how these work. And again, there's several ones because they're kind of optimized for different types of objects. So now let's kind of go through them one by one, and we'll kind of see which filters in general work for what kind of objects. Alright, so since I'm holding the battery UHC filter, we'll kind of start with this guy. And in general, I don't have these organized like this, on accident. These are kind of organized more or less from the wideband filters going down to the narrowband filters. So this guy, what are these good for? Well, these are made to be kind of as a general use light pollution filter. So technically what they're made for is that, no matter what object you're looking at, you could use this to kind of enhance the view, of pretty much anything that you're trying to see. Do they actually work? Well, on nebulas, they will give you a slight enhancement, so, these are definitely a good filter to have for nebulas. If you're looking at star clusters, globular clusters, and galaxies, on some of them they can make a slight enhancement. Essentially, what they do is, again, they'll dim down the whole image, but sometimes, like if you're in a really light polluted area, it'll just make the background look darker, just kind of, I guess makes you feel like you're at a darker sky. Again, for anything besides nebulas, you're not per se getting a better image. You might get kind of like more of an aesthetically pleasing image. But do keep in mind, there are, like a lot of nebulas. So, for stuff like M42, the Orion Nebula, this would be a good filter because there's a good amount of stars there. And narrowband filters, they'll still show up a good amount of stars. They don't really dim down stars as much as the narrowband filters do. Alright, so next up is the Batter Moon and Sky Glow filter. This is also kind of like a wideband filter. This is actually like a really cool filter overall. It both works as a decent light pollution filter that's wideband. Also, this is an awesome filter for the planets. I'm not really sure what all voodoo type of magic they used to get this thing to work. But like Jupiter looks great with this thing. Saturn looks great with this thing. Mars actually looks great with this thing. And the color rendition, the amount that this will change the the view color wise isn't all that great. It will kind of, as you could probably see on camera, it's kind of like a purplish type of tint that it adds to it. But it's not like a huge shift, like something like an H-beta filter or an O3 filter makes in the view. So overall, this is a great filter. Alright, so next up, I forget where I was introduced to this filter. I'm gonna call it the NPB filter, and I'll have links to all of these, in the video description. This is kind of like that middle of the road type of filter, to where it's not super wideband, it's not super narrowband. This is actually one of my favorite nebula filters, especially when I'm using scopes that are kind of like a moderate aperture size. So let's say like, I'd probably say from like a 4-inch to like, like around the 10-inch. A lot of nebulas look great with this filter. It's not so narrowband to where it blocks a lot of the starlight, although this will block more than, like the UHC type of filters. Or actually not the UHC, the wideband filters. Yeah, it enhances the contrast on nebulas, really well. So this is actually really cool. The other thing that I really enjoy with this is that it doesn't change the color again as much, as some of the other filters do. So awesome filter. I didn't name specific objects, but pretty much any object looks, pretty darn good with this, and enhances the contrast really well with this filter on a lot of different nebulas. Okay, I just said any object. I'm talking about any object that's a nebula. So again, for like galaxy star clusters, globular star clusters, this isn't really what you want to use it for. Okay. So next up, we have the O3 filter. This is, I would say, one of my top picks for a filter, especially if you have a larger scope. And what's a larger scope? Um, there's really no minimum that you could use these with. It really depends on essentially the exit pupil, essentially how bright of an image that you have. So a lot of times I'll use one of these, guys with like an 80 millimeter APO, but I'm using like a 40 millimeter, my Explorer Scientific 40 millimeter 68 degree field of view eyepiece. So I've got like, like a 6-degree field of view with a huge exit pupil, so it's a bright image that's coming through. The O3 filters, they work the best to enhance a lot of basically contrast in a lot of nebulas. So this will work really well on like M57, the Rain Nebula, M27, the Dumbbell Nebula. This thing works amazingly on the Veil Nebula. I forget what the NGC objects are, but that's that huge nebula in Cygnus. That's, it's essentially like the Rain Nebula, except I think it's like 3 or 5 degrees across. I mean, it's, it's ginormous. So awesome. This works really well, again, with like either a small little APO to show you the whole nebula, or if you have a huge daub, like, like a 16-inch or something like that, you put this sucker in there. I mean, that, the nebula just kind of pops, and comes alive. What, before I forget, these filters, especially something like an O3 filter, it actually increases the contrast of objects even from a dark sky side. So, you might ask, why is that? Well, because this is already a narrowband filter, you got to keep in mind that, there's light that, kind of is in space, even from like starlight and stuff like that. So even if there's no light pollution, from the Earth, essentially, this will still give you an increase in contrast. Especially on some objects like I said, like the Rain Nebula, Veil Nebula, and all that good stuff. Another favorite one of mine that a lot of people don't even figure you could see if you're at actually at a dark sky site. Check out NGC 7000, the North American Nebula, if you have a short focal length APO. A lot of people, like, especially if you're observing from the city, you could point like a 20-inch daub at it with this filter and you probably can't see it. But if you're at dark sky site, you have this filter, you could point an 80 millimeter APO, and there it is, easy to see, clear as day. And in fact, this kind of reminds me of a story. Back in the day when I was first getting into astronomy, I bought a Teleview 85. That was like my first, like nice scope. I had an O3 filter, and I think I was reading like on Cloudy Nights or something how difficult the North American Nebula was. I was at a dark sky star party. I've had some of my older buddies there that I had been in the hobby for years, and none of them had seen the the nebula, even though they had much bigger scopes than me. So I figured what the heck, let me try to point the scope and see if I could see basically. So I put my 31 millimeter Nebula in there with an O3 filter, and just right there, like clear as daylight, you could see the whole shape of like North America and the nebula. So it was really cool. I shared the view, of course, with my friends, and they were just totally blown away that this puny little APO can show the nebula, right, while their bigger scopes can't. So yeah, so O3 filter, awesome. This is one that I do recommend. Whether you're at a dark sky or if you're observing from light pollution, this is a great filter to have. Alright, and then last but not least, H-beta filters. This is it's a cool filter to have, don't get me wrong, but there isn't that many objects that this enhances the view of. Although there are some pretty popular ones that this works well on. Probably the most popular one is the Horsehead Nebula. The only issue with the Horsehead is that even if you have this filter, you have to be in some really dark skies to see it. I mean, I've seen it with my 16-inch daub, and even, with this filter at an incredibly dark sky. We have some of the darkest skies here in central Oregon, probably like 3 hours south of me. But yeah, even with that combo of dark skies, a big scope, and this filter, I mean, the nebula, I describe it as detectable. I mean, you could definitely see the little horse shape, but it's not easy. Another one is the California Nebula. That's a huge one. For that, you really need a short focal length APO, something like an 80 millimeter or 4-inch, and Basically the widest possible field that you could get. This filter plus some dark skies will show you that. Honestly, off the top of my head, I'm trying to think what other objects this kind of works well on. Those two, I observe pretty regularly with this, so, I know those pretty well. There's a few other ones, but really there's just not that many. So while this is kind of a cool filter, it definitely does work on the objects that kind of emit a lot of their light in that type of spectrum, but there's just not that many of them, so this is definitely not like your first or even your second filter that I'd recommend. Okay, so real quick brand-wise, does the brand of, your light pollution filters matter? For years and years, I think in the intro I kind of said that this is the filter that I've had the longest. A while ago I picked up a Mead Lightbridge, and when I say a while ago, it's probably been like 10 years. And it came with the H-beta, an O3, and a UHC light pollution filters from Orion, and I've been using them. And these Orion filters, I mean, they're not like the super low-end ones, but they're definitely not like the high-end ones like Lumicon, like Batter. There's a few other brands like Teleview, I think, used to make them. But I used these things for years. Kind of like throughout the years, I've kind of been trying to upgrade to Batters, and most a lot of my filters are Batter filters now. Have I seen much of a difference going from the Orions to the Batter filters? And I've actually had Lumicons as well in a lot of these filters. I honestly, I've never really spent the time to compare them side by side, just really kind of in depth. I never really, when I upgraded my Orion 03 to the Batter 03, I didn't see like a huge difference. Not like I was like, oh wow, like I could see like twice the nebulosity. So I would probably stay away from the really cheap Chinese filters, the no name brand ones. Yeah, like if you get decent brands, yeah, I don't think there's that huge of a difference. Like if I had to put a number on it, I'd say, I don't know, like 5 to 10% at most is the difference that you're kind of getting between, like, let's say an Orion and something like Lumicon that costs probably twice as much in general. So, do kind of keep that in mind. Alright, so now that we've kind of gone through all the different types of filters and, kind of like what type of objects they, that they work on, if you're kind of, just new to the hobby and you're looking to buy your very first, light pollution filter, what would I recommend? That's kind of a hard thing to kind of pinpoint down because it really depends on your sky, depends on your scope, it depends on what type of objects that you're trying to, look at. But just in general, like a general hip shot, and I've used a ton of different scopes, I've observed them in a ton of different environments, so I kind of do have a decent idea of what filters work, just in general. If you're trying to get a general light pollution filter, and you're also into planetary observing, like you want to, take a look at Mars, Saturn, Jupiter. The very first filter, honestly, that I would buy is that Batter Moon and Sky Globe filter. It's an awesome filter for the planets, and it actually works, probably about as well as like a narrowband filter on deep sky objects. Now, having said that, actually, so that's the first filter that I have. While I've got the wideband filters, represented with this guy. Honestly, these I have a hard time recommending just a general wideband filter. They really just don't enhance the view that much. I mean, they do kind of work on more objects, I guess, but I don't really feel like they work that well on anything though. So honestly, I don't even know why I have this thing. I very rarely use it. I think I just have it just so I have everything kind of covered, I guess, in my lineup. But yeah, like this, I definitely wouldn't recommend it as your first filter or anything like that. Next up, what else would I do? Again, it kind of depends on your scope size. If you have a larger scope, I would probably do an O3 filter. If you have a mid-range scope, or like you just don't want that ultra enhancement on some objects, you want a filter that kind of covers more objects. Either the Lumicon UHC or the NPB filter, this guy here. I probably personally use this the most, maybe tied with the Batter Moon Sky Glow filter, but that's because I use that filter on the planets as well. If we're talking about just like a light pollution filter, this is my most used filter. Again, the UHC filter is also great from Lumicon, so either this one or the UHC filter from Lumicon. Again, if you have a large scope, the O2 filter, or let's say you already have kind of more of like a wideband filter and you want to kind of cover the ultimate like contrast enhancements on a lot of, like nebulas, O3 filter, awesome filter. Honestly, you won't recommend you won't regret getting an O3 filter. So awesome filter. Some of the other, like the kind of this is kind of more of a specialty filter, H beta. If after you've got like a few of these, and you're really interested in seeing the Horsehead Nebula, yeah, I get this filter. Cool to have, but do keep in mind the objects that this even works at, you will have to have really dark skies. If all you're limited to is observing from the city, honestly, don't even bother with this. You're probably not going to see the objects that that this will enhance from the city anyhow. So you do still need really dark skies to see the objects that that this would help with. So anyhow, I hope that was helpful for you guys. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what all these filters kind of do. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, comments, or anything like that, leave them in the thing below. If you like this video, hit that little like button. And if you're not subscribed, please do consider subscribing. So thanks, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.